Well, hey guys, we're in Greenwood, Mississippi today, and I'm still using my old iPhone 8 to make these videos. See, I'm paying college tuition for a couple kids right now, and well, that's just the best we can do. I think the story today will be a meaningful one for you. We're going to show you all the sites that I think are pertinent to the murder of Emmett Till and the subsequent trial of his killers. Let's get rid of that background noise and get on with it. I think if you want to get to know a little bit about the who, what, where, and when, and maybe start to understand a little bit of the why, these three books are must reads for you. We're standing at the Emmett Till statue in Greenwood, Mississippi, and we'll return back here to Johnson Street a little bit later on in our story. As we go from place to place in the Emmett Till story and we pass other interesting historical sites in the Delta, I'll just simply show them to you as I tell Bobo's story. Emmett's cousin, Simeon, who told his story in one of the books I just showed you, did not know Emmett by his given name. He knew him simply as Bobo. And I think maybe the first place we'll head to is the house site. The field where Moses Wright's house was located, the home where Emmett was kidnapped from. Moses Wright, or Preacher Wright, had been in Chicago for a funeral and visiting family when everyone decided that Wheeler Parker Jr. and his cousin Emmett Till would return to Mississippi with him so they could spend some time with their cousins there. You know, it is said at the train station in Chicago that Mamie said to her son, "Bo, you didn't kiss me goodbye. How do I know I'll ever see you again?" No one much noticed as Bobo came back to kiss his mother goodbye, but some 2 weeks later, when Mamie came to Central Street Station, she was surrounded by media as she was there to pick up her son's body. This is your first look at the Tallahatchie River. It was an all-day train ride on the Illinois Central Railroad, and even though Emmett had been to Mississippi a few times before, his cousin Wheeler remembers that he was all over the train that day, and Mose had a difficult time keeping Bobo in his seat. Speaking of trains and the Illinois Central Railroad, it was their CEO that bought a 10,000-acre plantation in the Mississippi Delta and invited President Teddy Roosevelt for a bear hunt, thus giving the world the teddy bear. Forgive my ADD, so Emmett was all over the train until they stopped somewhere in Missouri, I believe it was, and all the African Americans moved to the car just behind the engine before they proceeded southward. Moses' son Maurice met the family at the train station in Winona, and they set off for the trek toward Money. You see, a big portion of Money, Mississippi, or Money Planting Company, was owned by Charles Merrill of Merrill Lynch fame. They were driving into what I call the sharecropper life. Moses Wright was one of the, we'll call him, main sharecroppers on a pretty good guy's farm, and Moses was valued such that he had one of the bigger and better houses to live in. Nonetheless, Mose and the boys headed toward his home on Dark Fear Road, just about exactly 3 miles from Money, Mississippi. Now, we're traveling along Dark Fear Road now, and on Monday of that week, maybe even in some of the fields that we're going by, Emmett tried his hand at picking cotton. He decided that the cotton field was simply too hot for him, and honestly, he wouldn't have been used to that kind of heat. So he was allowed to stay home the next few days while the family went and picked cotton. When the family got home each afternoon from the long hot day in the cotton field, they would find different ways to entertain Bobo. At one point, of course, they all went swimming, and one night they left the house that was located right about here and traveled to Money to buy some firecrackers. Emmett made everyone nervous when he set his off in the street in front of the store. On Wednesdays, the boys came to Money and parked just on the other side of that Mississippi Freedom Trail marker They were headed in the same direction you are now, toward Bryant's grocery and meat market. One of the brothers wanted to join a game of checkers that was taking place out front of the store. The Bryants had set up several tables that held checkerboards that allowed the sharecroppers a place to come in and gather and have fun in the evenings, and of course spend money in the grocery store. We are here at the Bryant's grocery in, well, early July, and as you can tell, the vegetation here in the summertime is just so very thick, it's hard to even see the door, which you're looking at right now. And I've read a couple different versions of events, but the one I believe most comes from Simeon, Emmett's cousin. One of the cousins went in for something to drink, I believe, and came back out of the store as Bobo went in to buy some gum. Now, it was hot in 1955 Mississippi, and so the doors and windows to the store would have been open, and everyone outside would have been able to hear what was going on inside. It seems most likely that Emmett's sin was that he touched Carolyn Bryant's hand when he paid her for his gum. He turned around and said goodbye when he went out the door, and when she came to this door moments later, he whistled at her. The boys raced back to Moses' house and at Emmett's urging did not tell Preacher Wright what had happened. Carolyn Bryant's husband, Roy, was out of town driving a truck, and when he got back home on Thursday, someone stopped him in front of Bryant's grocery and told him about what had happened. The boys finished their week in the cotton fields and Will had forgotten about the incident when they made their way back here to Greenwood on Saturday night. They interacted with and engaged in all kinds of nightlife here on Johnson Street in Greenwood that Saturday night. They got back to Moses' house around 11:30 or so, and about 2 or 2:30, Roy Bryant and his half-brother J.W. Milam showed up and kidnapped Emmett. They drove Emmett around in the back of a 1955 Chevy pickup. They drove out toward the Mississippi River looking for a certain spot that they wanted to stand Emmett up top a cliff and will scare him. And at some point, they made it by a cotton gin, much like this one, and they picked up a fan that ultimately they tied his body to. J.W. Milam at the time lived in a home that was on this particular site, and in fact, the brothers even said that this is the location where they beat Emmett and ultimately set him free. Well, we know that's not how it happened. We know that Milam and Bryant picked Emmett up at Moses' house about 2 or 2:30. Carolyn Bryant identified Emmett either in Preacher Wright's front yard or back at Bryant's grocery. Bryant and Milam took Emmett back to the grocery store, at which point he jumped out of the back of the truck, but was caught and brought back by one of the at least 2, maybe even 3 black men who were right in the back of the truck with him. They rode Emmett all over the Delta looking for this missing cliff on roads just like and probably even the one that you're on right now. About 4 hours or so after they had kidnapped Emmett, they brought him here. Another brother, Leslie Milam, was running this farm that he rented from the folks that created Holiday Inn. Willie Reed was walking along the road to the store when he heard screaming. He stopped off to tell someone in one of the nearby sharecropper houses when she sent him back to the well for water. While he was at this well getting water, J.W. Milam walked out of the gray door that you see on the right of this building. He had his Army-issued .45 in a holster on his hip. Willie stayed hid behind the well, and he continued to hear sounds that sounded like a beating, and he heard Emmett cry out and whimper, and then he heard nothing. Somewhere around the time the men backed the old Chevy pickup in the open sections of the barn, Willie left. The truck was later seen leaving down this same road with its bed covered with a tarpaulin. When the truck got to the barn, there were 4 white guys in the front, and depending on who you talked to, 3 to 4 black guys in the back. Of course, when it left the barn, things were a little different. At some point, the men took Emmett's body, tied it to that gin fan using a piece of barbed wire, and threw it all in the Tallahatchie River. On Wednesday morning, I believe it was, almost a full week after Emmett whistled at Carolyn Bryant at the grocery store, a teenager was down the river from Grable Landing running his trot lines when he noticed a pair of legs sticking out of the water. It is believed that they brought the body back up the Tallahatchie River to Grable Landing, where they got it from the river. It should have been somewhere right around here that Sheriff Strider was standing when he said this body looked like it had been in the river around 2 days. During some of my reading, I learned that the locals around here have another name for the Tallahatchie River. They call it the Singing River. One local even said to a news outlet during the murder trial that everybody knows that the Tallahatchie River is full of black folks. I'm guessing local African Americans call the Tallahatchie the Singing River because of all the souls of the lynching victims that were thrown here sing out in some fashion or another. J.W. Milam and Roy Bryant, of course, had been arrested and were tried for the murder of Emmett Till. That trial took place in the little community of Sumner. Because of where the body was found, I think they assumed that he was murdered in Tallahatchie County as well. For me, this courthouse has a great reverence about it. Part of the Emmett Till Interpretive Center, the courthouse is open for tours, but it also still functions as a courthouse. So when you come visit, just know that. Roy Bryant's and J.W. Milam's trial opened on September the 19th of 55 and finished on September the 23rd. And what I find most neat about this courthouse is that you can walk up and walk in through the same doors and up the same steps that the participants in 1955 did. See, I think the events that unfolded in this building may even be more tragic than what happened to Emmett. Why don't some of you guys let me know what you think in the comment section? Obviously, we're in the courtroom now, and I'm not going to give you a play-by-play of the trial. For that, you need to read those books I showed you earlier. I will tell you that Roy Bryant and J.W. Milam sat just inside this rail you're walking toward, right here in the center. You know, we're getting real close to the spot that I think birthed the civil rights movement, but let's look at the jury box. Ray Tribble is a member of the jury, and he bought Bryant's groceries sometime during the 80s, and it's his family that wanted $4 million for the building and is essentially leaving it to fall in. Here is the exact spot that I think the civil rights movement was born, at least in Mississippi. You see, Emmett's uncle, a guy named Moses Wright, stood up in front of the witness stand and pointed to J.W. Milam when he was asked to identify him. You see, this was the first time ever that a black man stood up and testified against a white man in a Mississippi court of law. If there is a hero of this horrible story, for me, it's him. He most definitely was putting his life in danger, and not too long after the trial, he moved to Chicago. As near as I can tell, the African American press was located around a little card table back in this right-hand corner of the courtroom. Seems like on the first day of the trial, they didn't even have that. I know that it was hard for them to hear very well from their press spot. The white reporters were up front around a long table. Bryant and Milam had 5 lawyers on their defense team, which was every lawyer here in Sumner. Left to right, they're K.W. Kellum, Sidney Carlton, Harvey Henderson, John Witten Jr., and J.J. Breland. During Carlton's questioning of Moses Wright, Mose decided to stop referring to him as Sir, which of course irked at least one of the jurors who called Mose Sambo. Witten was the last defense lawyer to speak to the jury, and he talked about how the case had brought such negative attention and negative newspaper coverage to the South. He talked about the rabble-rousers who had come to mess with their way of life. And then he told the jury, I'm sure every last Anglo-Saxon one of you has the courage to free these men in the face of that pressure. This is Witten's law office, where Milam and Bryant met with the writer William Bradford Huey and were interviewed for the article that Huey wrote in Look magazine that came out in January of '56. The two brothers admitted to the killing and told why they did it, but lied as much as they told the truth for sure. They seemed to be trying to keep their other brothers that were involved out of trouble. You know, Dr. T.R.M. Howard went to a young preacher's church, I believe in Montgomery, Alabama, not too long after the trial, and told all about Emmett Till and the events that unfolded. This was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s first church, and there was a young lady named Rosa Parks in the audience that day. Miss Parks was quoted as saying, as she sat on the bus that day and refused to give up her seat, all she could think about was Emmett. Well, guys, I hope you've learned a thing or two today, and maybe I've sparked some interest, and you'll do a little bit of reading, or better yet, come see this stuff live and in person for yourself sometimes. Thank you.